5 scenarios and how we can contain it. COP is agreeing what to do about it. IPCC is scientists elected by the best scientists. The latest physical science report is 3,947 pages, citing 14,000 peer-reviewed articles, where every scientist reviews every line. It is that rigorous. All IPCC reports are reduced into a policy synthesis, reviewed and approved by all 195 countries before the COP. In our terms, the COP is a global constitutional convention. How did it go? Well, the latest IPCC report can be reduced to 4 words spoken by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Code red for humanity. Code red for humanity. The scientists agree. It's getting worse faster than projected. 2015 Paris Accords gave us a map to a difficult future. Many countries, including the US, are failing to keep their Paris promises. If we manage to act profoundly in the next few years, we can preserve the option of a difficult future. If we do not, the children will face a dreadful future. So what's the problem? It's not that the leaders are all corrupt or incompetent, because I've met with many of them after hours. The US and the UK delegates were working their tails off, and so were the French and the Danes and many others. John Kerry wanted us to keep US promises made in Paris. Congress didn't give them the capacity to do so. Other countries face the precise same problem. Here's an image I drew. Well-to-do countries all have their swimsuits on, but most won't jump into the pool. And they can't agree who should throw the life rings for the poor countries in the pool struggling to keep their heads above water. So, side deals were cut to make the best possible progress, with hopes for more progress next year in Egypt. What's the good news? Well, youth and faith groups like us, as Episcopals, got observer status for the first time. Some cities and companies in a few countries are making true progress. Scotland reduced carbon expression by 30% in the past 5 years. Even major oil producers like Norway have made substantial progress. In a nutshell, it's doable if the people are behind it. 3 countries are now carbon neutral. Other good news is that this utter lack of progress has created a lively counterculture. There is a parallel People's COP that happens online and in person, which pointedly addresses the failings of the official COP, giving global voice to the injured and the excluded. Another invention of the people is the People's Hotel, where 2,000 Glaswegians open their homes to host delegates and activists from all over the world who could otherwise not afford to come. Most harm can't afford to be there to explain the harm. Universities had great forums on law, economics, business, and the politics of climate change. A 100,000 person march was a testament to Scottish civility. There was no tear gas, no rubber bullets, no windows broken, and a group of violent counter-demonstrators pretending to be communists were tightly surrounded and moved out of the march by 70 officers saying again and again, "Pardon me, sir, would you please move to the left? Pardon me, sir, would you please move to the left?" And they kept them there until the march was long gone. Hundreds walked hundreds of miles to Glasgow in prayer as a faith pilgrimage. Everywhere you turned, there were good people of every faith, race, and nation showing the unity of commitment that eluded the official COP. How to understand this? COP is a monumental mirror forcing humanity to see itself as it truly is. Altruism dances with avarice, devotion dancing with denial, hope dancing with despair. This mirror forces us to face the hidden history of harms that make our standard of living possible. It is the polluters beginning to truly know the polluted. This mirror shows a growing river of harm and death. It can't be covered up, Can't be deflected, can't be denied, it can't be voted out of office because it is driven by the laws of physics. Those most willing to face the mirror and to do what science says are the youth. They aren't just talking our faith values, they are living them. Their marches were studiously nonviolent, with places of honor given to the least of these. The most harmed and excluded led the way. Climate for Africa and hundreds of indigenous leaders were up front. Now, President Obama pointedly praised youth in his speech, saying that he felt they could save the day. Many prominent officials nodded their head in agreement in the main studio. I made a point to talk with youth in all the quiet places I could find, and I also conferred with Bill McKibben on the same issue and found we had the same take. Behind youth's immense achievements is a great personal cost. High rates of depression, high rates of burnout, utter incomprehension at how everything they do does not move the needle. They fight the conclusion that their lives do not matter. Many have largely let go of their dreams of a normal life, of family, of exploring the world, because they know if they do not keep CO2 below 1.5 Celsius by 2030, then normal life will be impossible, and we are already 90% of the way to 1.5. So, we must act now. They feel like they are on the Titanic. They know that the icebergs are ahead, and their pleas to change course are indulged and ignored. They feel abandoned by our failure to act. They are angry that the adults who have the political power and wealth to solve the problem look to youth to do it. We are the parental and the grandparental generation, and we have not stood up to protect them. They feel like political orphans. To get the press coverage they need, they must do protests and get arrested, and the convictions are forever on their resume, crippling their economic futures. We have not broken the blah, blah, blah barrier. I even found some talk of engaging in climate suicide, like the Buddhists immolating themselves in Vietnam, to wake up the world to the gravity of the peril. I found similar feelings in the Mile 3 protest in Minnesota in June, trying to stop a pipeline pushing super toxic tar sands through the Anishinaabe heartland at the headwaters of the Mississippi. Couldn't think of a worse place for a pipeline, which we do not need. There, 300 faith leaders came from across the nation. We were skillfully trained by youth about getting arrested, jailed, and bailed out and facing trial. These were the cream of the crop kids who should be tomorrow's leaders, and they had all been arrested repeatedly. They made banners, had first aid all organized, had lawyers to brief us. Their prep and their support was meticulous. More than one thanked me personally for being there. I asked another why, and she said, "It feels so lonely having to do this all ourselves." That broke my heart. I was in tears. Jesus' words, "Why have you forsaken me?" So what can we here in an American church do that will make a difference in the world? I asked many this question. The answer is we can do a lot. America is intensely watched as the bellwether of where the world is going. And many see us as unable to make up our minds if we are promise makers or promise breakers. The world in Glasgow is damn hungry for any Americans to publicly commit to climate change and keep our promises. Our activist youth deeply hopes that the over 60 crowd who have more influence and resources will stand and be counted. Bill McKibben so strongly agrees with this that he told me he's willing to come to speak to us if we get it together and have a dynamic participatory group. We here are needed now. We here can provide the hope by doing things that everyone here can afford to do. Number one, we own Code Red for Humanity. How? By publicly declaring a climate emergency on our public website. Some cities and congregations have done this. We don't rush into this. We lovingly address everybody's concerns of grace, their worries, and then we decide. Number two, we create a creation pledge drive 6 months after our capital pledge drive. We pledge first to know our impact by taking our household carbon footprint online. No Episcopal Church has membership as more than 20% that have taken this. If we get to 60 or 80%, then we will be news that the entire global Anglican communion will want to hear, because I've spoken with their climate director, and they can't crack it. We don't have to do this alone. We create a climate justice tribe at Grace of volunteers who are able to help take the tests and pledge so our staff is not burdened by our climate creation activities. I want to be in that tribe. Third, we pledge to understand this creation crisis so we can find what we are called to do and to educate others. Not by solitary study of atmospheric science, but by attending with the friends you choose a free virtual global training led by Al Gore's group, Climate Reality. I've spoken with them. If we are willing to work in this way, they are willing to take us on, every one of us. Our own Mary Cockcroft took this as a 17-year-old, and she loved it. Our youth groups could attend it together. Fourth, we can model the Paris Accord by pledging to reduce our carbon footprint individually by 50% by 2030 and to net zero by 2050, and do the same for our church. Then we publicize what we've done to the world. We can then address the central impasse at COP, which is that none of the developed countries are able presently to admit that they've created harm and haven't invested in healing that harm. Here, the other country is just another Anglican congregation that is now being hammered by climate change. I know of a number in Africa that could be considered. We'd meet that congregation online. By learning what is happening to them now, we can prepare for what will happen here years from now. Developed countries are balking at pledging 1% of revenue to remedy their harm. Churches like this can set the example by pledging 1% of our budget to provide solar panels, water purifiers, and other assistance to our beleaguered congregation abroad. If we lead, other churches follow. We can set the example. How is this about our faith? Well, what many see as a political failure of COP, I see as a beloved community trying to rise from the ashes of our actions. This beloved community desperately needs help. It cannot rise there until we rise here. If this feels overwhelming, then it means we have to step through the door together, not alone. Together we can face this, and frankly, feels damn good when you do. We are here so blessed with talent, wisdom, devotion, and capacity that if it cannot happen here, it cannot happen. We have a strong God. We are the children of this strong God. This altar is not just a podium, it is an altar of alteration, and we are here for transformation. I'm not asking you to join me. That's not the path. Path is joining you at the deepest part of your heart that says yes. And this isn't just a faith duty. It's healing a long neglected incompleteness in our faith. We do not worship the greater body of Christ we call creation like we worship the physical Christ. Our worship is in We study only God's second Bible and ignore the first immense Bible of her creation. Our study is incomplete. We profess inclusion as a fundamental value, yet we do not include those who our lifestyles have injured. Our faith is incomplete. We teach our children only the nativity and love of the physical Christ, not the nativity and love of the greater body of Christ. Our education is incomplete. To take our children off the cross, and our children and our grandchildren off the cross we have created, all we have to do is practice our faith fully. Right here, right now. All the powerful love you need is within you, beside you, above you, below you. Take a breath. Feel it. If we do this, will we lose parishioners? Not if there's love. If there's love, you will find people who feel the fear you are facing, flocking to grace. The most sadly political thing we can do is to continue to let our hearts be filled with fear. Each of you are mighty in your capacity to know. You are mighty in your capacity to grow. This does not take specialized knowledge. It is homemaking, making a new home in our faith, our hearts, and homes. Here.
I'm Marcy Monologue. This is a very hard act to follow, John. Impossible act to follow. You'll see at the base of the agenda 4 questions that Stephen put to all of us who are on the panel, and they're pretty big questions. Your faith, your purpose in life, how does that relate to climate? You don't have the agenda, I'm so sorry. Some big questions about our faith and how it relates to climate justice, our purpose in life, our relationship with our God. Cool questions. So I'm going to start just by saying that I'm speaking wearing multiple hats, and one that comes to me first is I am a grandmother. I'm a mother and a grandmother. And that makes a lot of our future very real to me, very tangible. I'm also a biologist, an oceanographer, and I've spent all of my paid and unpaid career working on environmental protection. And I think that goes back to my early experiences of something much greater than myself that was good were in the natural environment. That is my place of grounding and my place where I find something much bigger and truer. And in my years working for the Environmental Protection Agency, I was systematically seeing what we were doing to the environment. And since I've been retired, as we've learned more and more about climate change, one of the horrific things to me is that first people like Bill McKibben were alerting the world to how things were going to change by 2100. And then Gary went to a scientific conference and they were starting to talk about how things were going to happen by 2050. here we are in 2021, and we cannot deny horrific things are happening everywhere. And the scale, the enormity of the scale, the speed and acceleration of what's happening is overwhelming if you let it really sink in and feel it emotionally. And I realize that part of the time I'm frozen because I just can't deal with something that big. So I come at this using my grandchildren as a reference point. When we were first talking about 2050, I realized that my twin grandsons were going to be, I calculated, 34, in their 30s, at a time when most of us think it's the prime of your life. If we don't stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius, they're saying catastrophic things are going to be happening by then, as if catastrophic things aren't already happening. So I think about these grandchildren and the future they have. And this falls under a category, a new phrase I've learned, intergenerational climate justice. What is this generation and the past generations, especially in our country, that have lived a resource-rich life, a very consumptive life, what have we left on this planet for the planet's survival and for our children and grandchildren? And how do we bear that? So in the midst of all that horror and overwhelm, I ask the same questions John's been asking: what can we do? What I heard in listening to some debriefs from COP26 were that some would say that the time for individual action is past, that we need to move so far, so fast, that it's really at the government and policy and legislative level that big things need to happen. Well, my sense is that those big things happen only when the people are in the streets and the people are communicating with the legislatures and the people are demanding it and the people are voting for the right things. So it does come down to us, actually. share our feelings and our doubts and our fears with this. That's important to me, so I think that's what's happening here.
First of all, I'm Gary Lagerlof. Dear wife Mercy for her remarks to John. That was really fantastic. Yes, there. Yeah, okay, how's this? Very good. All right. Some of you know that over the years I've been doing a lot about trying to educate people about climate change, presenting some science, and with a sort of a highfalutin idea that if people would get it, they would do things and make changes, and the needle would start to move. And first of all, I really enjoy doing that. I enjoy science itself. Science is my profession. It's woven into my faith because the more scientific knowledge I gain, the more respect and wonder and awe I hold about the truth. So this is just being a scientist professionally is a spiritual journey. It has been as I become more and more aware of that idea throughout my adult life. A few years ago, I left my professional life and began retirement life. And I've had some time to reflect on this whole question of where are we going with climate change, and it feels like we're not moving fast enough, and all the evidence indicates we're not moving fast enough to address this. And I came to at least a recognition that all of my talking about science has been great. People are interested in it. They ask thoughtful questions. I enjoy the teaching aspect of it. And but I realize now that the time I started all that until recently, the science itself has become more and more mainstream and accepted. That my conclusion is that for all intents and purposes, the scientific debate about climate change is over. It's happening. It's irrefutable. So the debate has shifted. The debate has shifted from science to the politics. And in some ways, sometimes the science is used as a weapon in politics by sort of cherry picking things and saying, well, what about this? What about that? And so on and so forth. And these can all be addressed in a rational way. But the political problem that we're facing is enormous. And so my attention is moving away from just trying to preach science and trying to and so it's walking on thin ice here because here we are in a worship center, and science and politics are not, or science and religion, or politics and religion are not supposed to mix. Get my metaphors right. And but in reality, throughout our country's history, religion and politics have been closely intertwined. Let's just be honest about that. The only thing the Constitution says is that the government will not mandate a religion, and it will limit the free exercise of religion. That's the First Amendment to the Constitution. That's all it says. It doesn't say that religion cannot be engaged in politics. So I've changed my efforts a little bit to getting more engaged at the political level in a couple of ways. I've become more active in the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a political activist organization whose central intention is to lobby the federal government for meaningful legislation to deal with the climate crisis. And it's an amazing organization. It's a national, actually it's now an international organization. They hold major conferences every year. We have a lobby day in Washington, D.C. where we go lobby our representatives and put forth, the proposals. The main subject right now is doing a carbon pricing scheme in the United States, so that we can really start to. It's been analyzed economically for a long time as being the most effective way to have meaningful change in reducing carbon emissions. Setting that aside, the other thing I've engaged in, along with James, who's going to speak next, is the City of Bainbridge Island commissioned a Citizens Climate Advisory Committee about 4 years ago, and I was on the first group, and so was James, and we set out on the task of doing a carbon inventory for Bainbridge Island, and then putting together a climate action. Anybody read Climate Action Plan? It's on the city's website. I recommend reading it, and one of the central goals, the sort of top tier goal is, all right, what are we going to set out to do? Well, our overarching goal in terms of what the city needs to do is to reduce our carbon emissions, by 90% by the year 2035. Okay? That's a big goal, right? That's a big undertaking. So my feeling is that we're not engaged here, this circle, is what can we do as do our contribution to that 90%. It's going to come in two ways. It's going to come, what can we do with this facility to reduce our carbon footprint within this facility? And a lot of work actually is already been done. And what can we do as individuals? And Marcia just spoke to that, and John has as well, so I won't elaborate too much on that. But I'll just find my comments for the building just briefly to say that we have a very, very good future. Okay? We have wide open sun exposure all the way around. We can do something with that in terms of solar power. I don't know what shape and form it would take. It's expensive, but there may be some opportunity. Get some grant funding or collaborations with a utility company or a city hall or something that we can put a solar farm on the roof. Okay? That would be a beacon of light for the rest of it. We've been talking for a long time about our facility here. We have an oil furnace which is installed when the building is constructed. It's old and needs replacement, and putting in an electric heat pump would be a great and ideal way to significantly reduce our carbon emissions, because we wouldn't be burning fuel oil anymore. So that's another big step. A third step that I think is important is that our property here is surrounded on the west side and some of the southwest corner of forested land. Some of that land is up for sale. I don't know what we can do about that. We can't afford to go and buy those lots unless we find a way to raise money. But you know, there may be some way with partnerships and other ways that we can do some fundraising and organizing that we could, you know, somehow or other put that land into a conservancy. So I'll finish with one factoid, and that is that part of our process of beginning to develop the climate action plan for Bainbridge Island was we did a carbon inventory. And one of the things that several of us on the initial committee thought would be really worthwhile doing is that when we do this carbon emissions inventory, let's take a look and see how much benefit we are gaining as an island-wide community by how much forested land we have and how much carbon sequestration is going on. So when we hired a contractor to do this work of our carbon emissions inventory, we added this task to it, and the number came up as there was a real surprise to me anyway. That is that about 50% of our land on Bainbridge Island is forested. That's a lot of property. Of course, it's a mixture of public land and private land and park land and a lot of other things, but it's 50% of the island surface area is forested. And the number that they came up with was about, well, let's see, and we were saying it as close to 60,000 metric tons a year of carbon. It's actually a big number. It represents about 25% of our net carbon emissions calculation. The committee was quite unanimous in the opinion that we don't want to let carbon offsets let us off the hook in taking real concerted action in reducing emissions. So this is kind of bank and reserve, but if it represents 25% of our emissions today, then, and we can conserve that over the next, however long it takes to get from here to 2050 or 2045, we can reduce that, our emissions by 90%. We'll be net positive, okay? Not even net zero, but net positive in terms of we're absorbing more CO2 from the atmosphere than we're emitting. All right, so comes back around to the question of where does my spirituality come through is the inspiration I feel about taking action on things like this that we could do as a community.
I'm going to jump ahead of you, in part because we are in a state of, I don't know, panic crisis on Zoom with sound, but it seems like it's better now, John. I don't know what happened. Maybe prayer works. Okay, folks, so if you're on Zoom, please know that I'm continuing to watch you and respond to your comments, and whatever is working is working. But they had a hard time hearing us for a long time, so. But it is being recorded, and we must not fret. James.
Thanks. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to be here. Thanks for your words in particular, John, and Gary too. Marcy. I come to this as a member of this faith community, with a faith rooted in care for creation. And I can tell a little story about that. Come to it as a parent with kids who voluntarily talk about this stuff at the dinner table. They voluntarily organize at the playground at Ordway. They organize climate strikes without any adult supervision during recess, and then they come home and talk about it. I come to this as a professional. I spent the better part of 20 years as a meteorologist and a climate adaptation specialist and climate science advisor in city government, and I can share that story. But recently I switched careers and became a teacher, part because I was called to work with a different audience, called to work with the next generation. Like my kids and their friends at the playground at Ordway, they get it. They already know. Great work of Gary and others to educate over the years has made its way down through curricula, and they get it. They want to do something about it. And at the time I was discerning when to become a teacher a couple of years ago, Greta Thunberg was front and center leading protests around the world, and got into the classroom to find out that there are a lot of Gretas out there. Maybe not as powerful as she is, she's wonderful, but that spirit exists in the next generation. And so I got in there partly because of frustration, working with political leaders, partly out of some cynicism, and then I got in there and I was like, wait a minute, I'm not going to go convince. I don't need to convince. You got it? Like, let's just start working on solutions. Sort of shift gears. That's been refreshing. Let me take a step back though. So, finished college with a degree in meteorology, jumped out, started working, forecasting weather around the world. For years into my job, I began to see the impact of extreme weather. And moved around the world a little bit, lived in the Caribbean, etc. Got exposed to different relationships with nature and really decided to want to do something not just about forecasting weather and figuring out why we just had a convergence on the field and that's great, that's wonderful, but how does that impact people? And so I decided to study climate change here at the University of Washington and spent a wonderful 13 years at the city of Seattle as a meteorologist, but also as someone who could translate the science for decision makers. I think I survived 4 mayoral administrations over in Seattle. Each time a new one came in, we had to kind of start from scratch and lay out the science and lay out the impacts and try to work on a climate action plan, a couple different iterations. But what to do, how to reduce the carbon footprint, how to adapt, how to prepare for the impacts that are already starting to happen. I did grow a little frustrated with the fact that every time a new mayor came in, a new administration came in, we'd have to start over again. And to be honest, it's been, I grew kind of cynical. Seeing this for the collective action problem that it is, so many of us want to do something, and here we are trying to gather as a community to figure out what we can do, and I hope that we can. We can become vegetarian. We can switch out our light bulbs. We can start riding bikes more. We can do all of that. To be honest, though, I think we need to do something else at the same time. This is a problem in which the science is clear. The laws of physics, as John put it, and I do teach physics, and I take every little opportunity to weave it in. The laws of physics are clear how the energy budget of our planet is changing and how it will continue to change. The laws of capitalism, as it were, are also pretty clear, and why we have politicians who are bought who don't really want to do anything to change this problem. And it's difficult for us, so many of us, to change our ways when we are so comfortable. But I'm holding that cynicism here, and I'm not going to let it take over, because I do believe that we can change our behavior collectively. We can change our behavior, and I want to work at that. At the same time, I also want to fight fire with fire. And we got into this mess, or we accelerated this mess thanks to internal combustion and some other things. One area that I'm hopeful, and it's careful, it's dangerous. Carbon sequestration through technology. We can figure out a way to safely remove carbon from the atmosphere and store it. Maybe do something with it. Behavioral change. We can get to 2050, 2070, 2080, and we will unfortunately deal with so many more impacts, catastrophes, and pass on trauma from generation to generation. We might be able to shorten that a little bit, and if we compare it with the reality of our capitalist world and the civilization that we are a part of. Our consumption started millennia ago, only accelerated due to technology. Excited by the fact that Iceland got a bunch of sequestration plants. The company up in DC. What if, in addition to protecting our forests, Grace bought a little generator, and we did our little part, and we started sequestering carbon ourselves. We've got a way to go back is reliable and safe and efficient and affordable, et cetera. We're watching technology change over the course of our lifetime. I think we can do that pretty quickly, and I think we can also switch over to not eating, et cetera, changing our light bulbs. We don't need to do that. So I come to this with rooted in caring for creation. You know, prior to joining this community, I've been a member of some Catholic churches, and was inspired by Pope Francis, with Martin and previous parish reform care for creation committee and eco-justice committee, and we started doing things. It's great. But I think we need to also just address the fact that it's capitalism and technology and our civilization that got us into this mess. We've got to work within that system. We got to get out in the streets and push our politicians, because there are plenty of good ones out there. There are plenty of good ones out there. I'll just finish by just reiterating that I also come to this as a parent, and my kids talk about it as I know, and every day I get up in front of 80 high school seniors, and they don't need me to explain what's happening and why. The best I can do is get up there and explain how heat engines work and how carbon behaves in the atmosphere and so forth, with the hopes that they will be inspired to change their behavior and maybe be inspired to come up with that technology that will help us, in addition to the behavioral change, move forward. So with that, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We're still working on this sound problem. If you can hear me on Zoom, please know that I'm going to ask, and this is the first they're hearing it, but I'm going to ask all of these panelists to submit something in writing that can be assembled and put into a document and shared with the entire parish community. So if you're not hearing any portion of this, the essentials of all of our talks will be captured. And so say I. I'm gonna try something. It might be worth 30 seconds just to mess around with these for a moment. So now, number one, okay. So now I'm using a different microphone and I want to check with Zoom. Apparently it's not only that they can't hear, it's that they hear a cacophony of static or interference. Increase volume, please, says Julie. Can you, I don't know if you can increase the volume one way or another, John. Now it says good now, says Willa. Okay. This is my approach to this whole issue. I approach this issue the way I approach any issue of faith. For me, when I think about faith, when I think about or feel about God, I wonder and I ask myself, what tears my heart out of my body? What do I have to do? Because if I don't do it, I will depart from my own humanity. What must I do if I want to sleep at night, if I want to die a holy death, if I want to hold my head high in the presence of my nieces and nephews? What must I do? And it's a fairly short list. So, and this is just me personally. But one is stay sober. That's one of mine. And tell people about the solution I found to that problem. Another one is to practice genuine kindness with people I work alongside and talk to. And this sounds small, but it isn't small. It's to say, hi, how are you? To baristas, to clerks in stores, to people I see on the street. Another one is attentive driving. Like, if I drive inattentively, I could kill someone. I could end a life. And so attentive driving is an act of faith for me. And so when I think about climate, I don't think about giving $25 to the Sierra Club and calling it good, though it's not the worst way to spend $25. I don't just think about recycling and looking at the little number on the recycling label at the bottom of a piece of plastic, though that's not such a bad thing to do. Those are all good things to do. It's deeper than that. And one way that came through to me recently was on Instagram, scrolling through Instagram, which is inadvisable. And, and I see this picture of a woman, clearly from somewhere in Africa, but I was scrolling so fast that I didn't catch it, where exactly she was. And I was going to keep scrolling, and something, God, someone, something told me, go back up and look at that person. So I went back up and looked at that person, and it was The Guardian magazine was trying to get me to buy their subscription. And they had this whole display of photographs of people in South Sudan who are dealing out. So they have horrible rainy seasons now and terrible drought seasons. And one of the pictures was a woman laying in a little bed, a kind of wicker sort of bed, if you could call it that, no sheets. And about 1.5 inches from her bed was floodwater, rancid, fetid floodwater. And one of the things that makes life worth living for me is having a good mattress and blankets and a fan running and darkness and the ability to sleep and then wake up and then go back to sleep again. That's a spiritual experience for me. And so I connected with this photograph, and often it's photographs that grab me. Another one that did that 16 years ago was a little girl who died in Hurricane Katrina. She was in the curb on a street, half submerged in water. And you could see the little barrettes and ribbons in her hair, dead. And it just grabbed me, and I just thought, I can't go to church or say a prayer if it doesn't somehow connect with that girl, right? Another one was in Yad Vashem, where, and I've talked to some of you about this, where I saw a picture of a pit, right? And there's a line of people, and when you get to the head of the line, they shoot you in the head and drop you in the pit. And I just stared at that photograph. It's the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And I thought, I can't say another word out loud about God or Jesus or grace or forgiveness or sin or love if I'm not going to be in relationship with this photograph. And so this is my take on climate change and the climate crisis. It is catastrophic, and people are dying. And if I want to retain my humanity, I have to invest. I have to be involved in several levels. So there is the everyday level of just daily practices and reducing your footprint and paying attention to that, and that is important. And there's the faith community level. So I talk about it in my preaching, and I give the microphone to these folks, and we talk together about ways that we can connect with other churches. And then there's the larger level. So for example, my congressperson is Pramila Jayapal, and so you're welcome. She's she's a great public servant, and I'm pleased to vote for her every other year. And it tends to make me a little complacent, like all of my representatives get it, and yet I should still be acting on a larger global level. I should not rest. So one of my projects in 2022 is to get more informed about Seattle politics and ways that I can make a difference in a larger sphere. But all of it, again, comes down to what do I need to do to retain my very humanity? Because if it doesn't pull me there, then it doesn't add up to much for me. That's my take. Good sound now, they say, which also helps me sleep at night. I don't want to mess with success. This is an awkward way to do it, but I want to ask for your questions and comments. And so if you have one, I'll just bring this to you. I'll put my mask back on and bring you this little microphone. And I invite you to ask us, any of us, John or any of us, a question that you'd like us to address. I'm Phil Donahue at this particular moment.
So I'll apologize that I walked in late, so I don't know if I missed something. But I wear several hats in my work world, but one of them is to have formed a company that helps organizations write their sustainability plans, and related and somewhat not related is developing some composting systems that can be used in community-based areas. So, think of the mega yards of King County or Vancouver, BC, and I just always believed they were missing the boat and not being able to have one in communities. And anyway, but in my work, I have been doing this for 10 years now, and one of the most difficult things is the pushback that you get from communities. And, it's basically the NIMBY. And like when you were speaking about the trees on the island, what pops into my head is, wow, okay, but how many people, different people own all that treed property? And what if their lifelong dream is having a cleared, perfectly sunny piece of property? And where I'm going with this is that I thought it would be fascinating tonight to hear from you and from you. How do we try to get our community, at least as a start, to look at the collective good, what we all might have to give up a little bit of to find solutions that are going to save the world for all of us? And I'm feeling that, starting with faith is is a really good place to start, but I haven't gotten too far past that realization. And so anyway, I would love to hear your thought on, using Christianity in our churches and educating people there and just reaching to some of the core values that we have anyway, and bringing that to the fight for climate change.
Want to take that one?
Okay, Genesis 2:15. Oh, Genesis 2:15, when God took man and did not place him in the garden, didn't ask man into the garden, he put him into the garden and said, you must serve this. That's a door to the sacredness of soil and the sacredness of the creation of soil and the sacredness of the perpetuation of soil. And in a sense, you are a gardener of compost and many other things. And as we begin to make soil itself sacred, humus, then its value rises and the resistance becomes slightly ashamed of itself because its nimbiness may have to do with some collateral things. The value of it, the smells of it, and all those things that we might find slightly irritating are recapitalized as something essential to our survival.
I would add another thing. What this brings to mind for me is how there are members of our community here at Grace who are in different places on this issue. They have perspectives and opinions that that are at great odds with many of the things that we've said this evening. And I think one dimension of the work that we can do here that is truly good work and is deeply Christian too, is to engage those folks in peace and in truth and with respect and to find common ground. Like that's a first step, would be to find common ground. In our Sacred Ground programming that we did last year, it opened with this story about this organization called Living Room Conversations that brings people together from different political backgrounds, impossibly different. Tea Party versus Berkeley liberals, and having them talk. And the first step is, what do we have in common? And there's a lot that we have in common. A concern for the health of the earth, a concern for our grandchildren, a concern that we do the right thing, a concern that we follow science, that we understand science and work with it, and so forth. And then you can go from there. And so I found that when I'm open to what they're saying, they can listen to me. And some of what they're saying has some merit, or it's at least worth some discussion. So that's another dimension. I don't know if that answers your question at all or gets at what you're getting at, but a part of our life in faith together is being in dialogue with people who are not on board yet, and letting them not be on board as long as they need to, but staying in relationship, staying connected. Others? I can't. Okay. They can't hear you yet.
So this last question just brought to mind for me. I do a lot of mediation work, and I've trained mediators for the past 12, I don't know, maybe a little longer than that, years. And one of the, in talking about dealing with people that are coming from very different places and that find themselves in conflict, one of the things that we look for are common grounds. And you've probably all heard of Marshall Rosenberg's work in nonviolent communication. Well, this discussion raised for me something about his work that I found helpful as a mediator, and that is in searching for this common ground area, Rosenberg is looking for universal interests that we all have. And we could say, we all have social needs that we share: inclusion, affection, control, autonomy. And then the way that he puts it that's helpful to me as a mediator is he says, we have those things in common, all of us, and other things too. Where we differ are our strategies for achieving those things. And so even our identities, when we get into these big identity things politically, can be seen as strategies for satisfying these deeper interests. And so that's one way to look at it that's helpful as a facilitative mediator.
I found it very interesting one time in a social situation to be face to face with someone else. This was about 12 years ago. At the time, the Joplin, Missouri had a cluster of hurricanes. And we had our wine and cheese, We were getting along like good Bainbridgeites. And he wondered why I was using biodiesel. It was twice as expensive as gasoline, and that was at a really high point for gasoline. And so it worked. This is the first time I tried this audacious move, but to ask him, I said, well, he said, well, I want to do things that are cheaper. And I said, well, I'm interested in stopping carbon from destroying the earth. And I said, wait a minute, think of those tornadoes that took Joplin down. I said, that's really terrible, isn't it? And he said, yeah, it is. And he said, but you need to know I'm a climate skeptic. And I said, oh, well, that's good information. I said, but I wonder, maybe you could tell me at what point you might be convinced that it was the climate. And so we walked disasters all the way from Missouri to his waterfront house, and he finally, and I don't think I convinced him that night, but I set the stage. And this year we had 400 people dead from heat exposure running from Oregon up to BC. And I've wondered about contacting this man again and saying, was that enough?
I want to add a quick point to the idea of land and common ground and strategy, I think we've made pretty good headway in an area that we might not all agree on how to talk about it, but we're getting more comfortable with recognizing the land on which we live and the fact that it didn't belong to us in the first place. Occupied Salish, occupied Coast Salish, occupied Suquamish. There are a number of ways, occupied Duwamish in Seattle. I think we should continue to do that. I think Grace should consider being more open about that. And I think that's an area where it's true. And if we say it right, we can find some common ground there. And then to go a little bit further with that, we have to recognize that the not in my backyard trees, in fact, definitely aren't in your backyard. They're not anyone's. They're not anyone's backyard. So, I've always, in my frustrated years of advising, politicians would try to push for creative use of eminent domain and taking property that is of value with respect to sequestration, or that is high impact from, you know, floods or fire, et cetera, from impacts. And so if we get creative, I think we can get creative with how we recognize our land, and I think we can get creative with how we decide who gets to own what and how we can compensate those who have high value land and maybe put, you know, affordable housing on the golf course in Meadowmere, and, you know, do some kind of swap for the wonderful forest that we do have. Maybe we build some housing along the edges of it and just take a little bit, and then, you know, whatever, we can get creative, I think, with what we have, because we have a wealth on this island, and ultimately it didn't belong to us in the first place anyway. So
I just want to add a quick story. The solutions may be quite different than we expect. I met with a Anishinaabe grandmother, the most highest ranking water carrier, and within the Anishinaabe, the water bearers are all female. So she was respected deeply throughout the region. And I said, what can white people do? And she said, you can't do anything until you know yourselves. And you don't. You need to know your ancestors, you need to know yourselves, you need to know the creation that is around you in order to know yourselves.
I'd like to make one other comment in response to your question, which I'll try and paraphrase, that you have experienced some pushback and some resistance in some of the projects that you've undertaken. And I guess from a pragmatic point of view, we just have to expect that. I mean, the changes that we're talking about are fundamental. There's going to be resistance, you know, and if you look back in our own lifetimes of the major social movements and justice movements that have taken place during the 20th century, like the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, there was enormous pushback. And yet, you know, you've got the irresistible force meeting the immovable object, but as the irresistible force gained more popularity and more momentum, there was movement. So we have to exercise determination and patience and persistence, and recognize that people will resist, and it's because their own vested interests are at stake. And we have to be able to learn how to converse with them about that, and maybe show them a higher interest that in the long run is better for all of us. You know, and that's a spiritual journey in and of itself.
So John, I just want to thank you for going to Glasgow, and your conversation. I'm really sorry that the Zoom people didn't hear if they missed it, and I hope they get it in some other way. But you brought us a lot of hope by giving us a whole bunch of very local ways and Grace Church oriented ways that we could make a change. My question to you and to the greater Episcopal Church is, how many of those things do you feel are realistic and something that churches could get behind? And by that, I mean, not just the small groups and not just the tribe or the home group or whatever we're calling it now. I'm going to make that change, I promise. Thank you. You know, how much of those pieces, you know, will meet resistance from the church, this church versus, and the Episcopal Church as a whole, or, you know, like, those are very local, but they're also pieces that, you know, I don't know. Your suggestions gave me a lot of hope, and I liked that. Thank you.
I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can speak with broad authority about the Episcopal Church, but I can say that I have not been. Where have I been? I've been to General Convention. I've been to an Episcopal seminary for 3 years. I've been to our diocesan convention every year, roughly. I'm in a close relationship with our bishop, and I know several other bishops, and I have not once heard any discouraging word about climate justice or our need to respond to the issue. That doesn't mean we're acing it by any stretch. But I think that in our larger church culture and here at Grace, climate justice is a stated value. And that's encouraging to me, that it can actually become a lived value over time. And that should only increase as the next generations come to power, as it were. So that gives me hope too. That said, it's hard because, like, one of the problems we have is we all have physical plants and oil-based boilers and all the different things. And so there are 1,000 different things that need to change, but there are hopeful signs that our larger church culture is responding. John, I wanted to give you a chance to respond.
Well, I'll take a flyer and say I've talked with our Bishop Greg directly on all these points, and I think he supports them. Moreover, the church mirrors the challenges of every city in the nation, which is the church has many old buildings. The church has limited resources. And if we can manage to harness the beloved community that this church can potentiate, we can set a standard for how small towns, larger towns, and other areas can create a transition. There can also be a beloved secular community that is following the example of our beloved holy community.
There are probably more questions. John, we'll let you ask the last one and then we'll do our conclusion.
Well, I was going to try to respond in some way to where Molly got us started, to talk about the structures and processes of our local government. We have, thanks to Gary and other people, James and so on, we have a climate action plan. Action is a prominent word in the local scene now. We have a housing action plan. But on the other side, there is so much inertia built into the structures and activities. There's activity without action. And the obstacles to collaborative work, real work. I've just been to one council meeting last night, and there's more to come, of course. I'm already so up against it. And it's possible to subvert the status quo. It's possible to act against it, but it takes a lot of people to get it done. It takes people making some noise and also offering some wisdom. So there's a whole lot of things.
Thank you, John. And we're going to wrap up in a few minutes. And what I thought I would do, and this is, I didn't frame it this way in our planning meeting. So if you can just roll with me, that'd be great. I'd like to do a lightning round, as it were, a lightning round where the 5 of us each in, I don't know, 30 seconds, say what's next. And that could be what's next for me, or what's next for you and me, like come and help me do what I want to do next. So I'll start. What's next for me is I actually am one of those annoying people who not only makes New Year's resolutions, but I get them, I make it happen. So I set goals on January 1st, and then I look at them at the end of December, and usually I nailed it, I crushed it, right? And so one thing that I want to do that's next is to set a goal around this as a dimension of my ministry. Just that's a personal thing. So I've already preached on it, and I want to deepen that and get other voices preaching on it, and have it be more of our dialogue in this coming year. And then just one more thing that I might do, and I'm over 30 seconds, would be to adopt a stance of experimentation. I'm going to experiment with something and see where it takes me. If it doesn't work, or if I end up feeling frustrated, or I'm just up against it, that's okay. Experiment was successful. I learned something. So I'm going to now try something else. And not be a dilettante about it, but just have that light touch or that light handle on the success of a thing. And just experiment with at the different levels of self, community, world. That would be my lightning round contribution. Okay.
Okay. I'm here to serve anyone at Grace with a climate question, a climate worry, or a climate doubt. I can meet with you. I may not have the answers, but I will listen like hell.
Stephen, you've inspired me to try to find the humanity and to be more kind, but also to recognize my authenticity and speak a little bit more. When I do say hi to so-and-so, maybe add in something about how I'm feeling about climate change, or grab the mic at a council meeting. And then finally, follow up with John's comment. If you ever want a weather forecast, I'm here for you.
Offer that. But what I am hearing tonight is speaking about it more and speaking with each other in this context, in this community context, which I consider a safe and a loving place. And encountering authentically our grief and our hopes. And I think there's a genuine need for action that most of us feel, and figuring out what to do with that. So I think we can have those conversations now.
I think, Stephen, your real question that you're asking us is, where do we as individuals go from here? What are we taking away from the evening? And I think for me, more of a personal awareness of every action I take. Am I contributing to the problem, or am I contributing to the solution? one action at a time. You know, one person can't do 1,000 things, but 1,000 people doing one thing can accomplish the same goal. So just on a day-by-day basis, what am I going to accomplish today? If it's just one step towards getting solar panels on the roof, right, that's one step.
So we have reached the end of our time. But again, I want to reiterate my promise that we will capture this in writing so that there's a takeaway. And I think the sound problem was mostly, I'm sorry to say, an issue with the two of you. That was when the cloud descended. So I think they heard most of John's talk, and it has all been recorded. And so I'll find out. But we're going to capture this in writing so that we can continue this and not just go back to our lives. But I encourage you all to do the lightning round yourself, just to think like, what might be next for me? What's next? And then try something after that. So thank you so much. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.